Well, it's been about 9 months since I imported my TVR Cerbera into the United States, and a full review of this car is long overdue. Hi, I'm Aaron Forster, and welcome to Aaron's Eccentric Garage. The TVR Cerbera is unlike anything you're ever going to find on the road. There are so many unique attributes and features of this car that any review that doesn't actually highlight them would do this car a serious injustice. So as you enter into the interior of the TVR Cerbera, you'll be struck very quickly by the uniqueness of the design language. The dash itself has grown out of the center console, as it seems, into this organic, almost alien-like shape. But everything is still focused towards the driver, where the center console, all the knobs, everything is focused on the driver experience. Another attribute of the interior that's kind of unique is that the pedal box itself is very, very deep inside of the footwell. So in order for me to actually fully depress the clutch and the throttle, I need to actually scoot almost entirely up where my knees are practically in the dash. Once I'm in this driving position, I can fully depress the accelerator, the clutch, I have plenty of headspace, and also I can recline farther back or I can sit more straight up depending on my preference. So as you get into the TVR Cerbera, one of the other attributes that you're going to see is the uniqueness of your gauge clusters. You're going to have a lower gauge cluster and an upper gauge cluster. And in the lower gauge cluster, you're going to see a couple of standard things like a fuel gauge and a clock. And then you also have your ignition button and your ignition kill button. But something that I personally love, and I wish more manufacturers would do this, is a vent. This little vent operates almost like a little eyeball, so you can spin it around, open it, and close it. So you can aim it directly into your face, or you can aim it towards your nether region. So this is lovingly referred to as a ball chiller vent. So as your eyes come up to your steering wheel, you'll notice a few other buttons. You'll notice your windshield wiper squirter, and also the wiper itself, your horn, and your headlight high beam. But you'll also notice that there's only one stock, and this is going to be off to the right in this very nice machine metal arm that sticks off. You click it up to turn left, click it down to turn right. However, unfortunately, it does not automatically kick off when you turn the corner. So you have to actually press it again in the direction that you're going in order to turn it off. Now, in order to turn your hazards on, all you need to do is simply press the outer portion of the stock, and it turns your hazards on. Now, a few other buttons that you'll notice behind the steering wheel is your rear fog light. Now, this is something that's more unique to European cars, but it is easily accessible right here on the dash itself. To the left of the steering column, you're going to find the headlight selector switch. A couple of twists to the right and your headlights come on. A couple of twists to the left, they're off. Fairly straightforward. So when we look at the upper cluster, you're going to find a couple of standard things. Your speedometer, your tachometer, but you're also going to find a multi-informational gauge that shows your temperature and your oil pressure. So as we look at the gauge cluster, you're going to notice a bunch of these little indicator lights dotted throughout the gauge itself. Some of them are for the turn signal indicator, for your emergency brake, or your check engine light, but one that's really unique is this little snowflake one that tells you about the potential of warning for ice and to actually take it easy on the engine before it comes up to temperature. Another attribute of the TVR Cerbera is that this is a 2+2. This is a two-seater with a couple of little bucket seats in the back. However, it's not really meant for anyone with legs. So I have the driver's seat all the way forward and my butt is barely fitting in this. So even if I were to recline this so as you can see, even with the seat all the way forward, the seat very vertical, there's no way an adult can fit back here. And it's pretty much the same for behind the passenger seat. These are seats in name only. However, I have seen some people who are able to slide the passenger seat all the way forward and put a small child in the back, making it a little safer than having them in the front seat. One of the key design elements of the TVR Cerbera is the fact that it is a very, very clean and very curvaceous design. But the designers actually wanted to keep that that theme going. And something that's been consistent with other TVR models is there's no break in the door for a door handle. Now, in order to get into the car, it's a little bit of fun magic. You put your finger underneath your mirror, press a little button, and the door opens. Getting out of the car is similar by pressing the little black button on the door panel. If for any reason the buttons don't work, there's an emergency pull in the footwell. So a design element that really stands out on the TVR Cerbera is the actual curve where the door meets the fender. This is very similar to how Dodge Vipers are built in the earlier years. Now, although this is a very unique stylistic choice, the rumor has it that this was done for another reason. Because these cars are made out of fiberglass, the panel gaps are not always the best. So by having the door curve and kind of dive into the fender, the legend says that this was done so you can have better panel gaps at the rear quarter panel and hide the massive gap in the front. As we come around to the rear of the car, you can see how very voluptuous and curvaceous it really is. And with that same design language of hiding all the buttons and the way to get into the car, the way you get into the trunk is you look for the emblem itself, give it a good press, and your trunk lid opens. So now that we have the trunk open, you actually can clearly see the gas tank right here, which is about 15 gallons, give or take. But what makes it so interesting is that you're gonna have all of your computer modules underneath this Velcro flap that sits right on top of your gas tank, and off to the other side is gonna be all your relays and fuses. Now inside of this trunk, it's also very simple, but another little neat attribute is that your fuel cap filler is gonna be right here. The trunk in the Cerbera is surprisingly large and can accommodate a couple sets of golf clubs, or in Mafia terms, one body. So surprisingly, you can put a lot of things here in the Cerbera trunk. To open the hood, you twist the hood latch located under the driver's side dash and lift the hood forward. With the hood propped open, we now have access to the AJP8 engine. Now this is the Speed 8 engine in my TVR Cerbera. This is a 4.2 liter aluminum flat plane crank V8 with individual throttle bodies, flat top pistons, and a red line of 7,000 RPM. Although this is only the 4.2 liter, TVR also did make a 4.5 liter as well. What makes this engine also unique is that a lot of the accessories like the alternator or the starter are all inboard, because this engine was originally designed to also be an engine for a race car, for a single seat race car, so it could also be made part of the structure of the vehicle. As we come around to the front end of the TVR Cerbera, one of the things that also grabs your attention is how long this hood is. Now, despite the length of the hood, the entire engine is behind the front axles, making this car a front midship vehicle. As beautiful as the vehicle is, the aesthetic part of the car is only half the equation. The other half is driving it. The 4.2 liter V8 engine puts out 368 horsepower and 320 foot-pounds of torque. With a 0 to 60 of 4 seconds and a top speed of 185 miles per hour, this means that for a 25-year-old car, it's still fast. Before I get into the driving review of the TVR Cerbera, I do need to preface that this vehicle is not on stock suspension. It does have gas gold coilovers, so it is lowered a little bit, and that's why it's a little bouncier than it would probably normally be with normal suspension. So in addition to having the suspension being modified for a lower stance on the vehicle, I also have a modified exhaust on the TVR Cerbera. Now in the state of Arizona, if your car car is over 25 years old, you can actually apply for collector car status, and you must have collector car insurance as well. What this means is that if you do have a car that's registered under those guidelines, you do not need to take it in for emissions testing or emission standards. So what that means for me, if you look at my previous video, then you'll also see that I was able to take out the catalytic converters in the TVR Cerbera and replace them with test pipes, or basically decat this car. It also has sport can exhaust. Basically the mufflers in the back of this are sports mufflers as well. So it does get a little droney after a while, but at the same time it does sound great. If you roll down the windows, you can hear the pops and bangs. If you turn up the radio, you're going to be able to enjoy your ride no matter what. Now, if you're driving on the street or on the freeway like I am currently, this TVR Cerbera is a great GT car. This is something that you could probably put tons and tons of miles on a nice long road trip. The longer wheelbase means that it handles the bumps pretty well. Although I do have the stiffer suspension, it is a little bouncy, but the bounciness aside, it's not bad. What I do wish it had though was a dead pedal for my left foot and cruise control. So after a while, I can see like your right leg and your back kind of hurting if you're holding that throttle position for a period of time. Or in the case of like the missing dead pedal, I'm finding that I'm either having to lift my knee up and kind of park it next to the transmission tunnel, or I'm having to stretch it out and put it behind the clutch itself to stretch out my leg. So this is one area I understand why there is no dead pedal. It is very narrow on either side because the car is relatively small despite its appearance. Review of the TVR Cerbera would not be complete without taking it back out to my favorite driving spot here in Arizona. And you actually can watch that video right here. Now, on these back canyon roads, they're very twisty, windy, hairpins. I mean, they're tight, and the TVR is not my Mazda. The Mazda is I built specifically to be like a scalpel, to carve mountains and to pretty much eat up this road safely, but also very quickly. The Cerbera is definitely geared very differently than the Mazda, and because of that, also the fact that I don't have to wait for a turbo to spool up means I have instant power and torque at a different RPM ranges. Now, that's great, especially if we're going uphill. Now, because I've never taken this car on this road before, and because it has a notorious reputation, well, TVRs in general have a reputation for being widowmakers because the power, the way they're delivered, there's no traction control, there's no airbags, there's no ABS, so you have to use good judgment and also use your brakes and your throttle in a manner that is actually, well, meant for a good driver. So what I'm noticing so far on these twisty roads is that the TVR Cerbera's handling is very, very tight. Very little input gives you a very good response. So although the car is, like I said, very similar to a Viper in that regard, it also has very sharp, very precise handling. Because the engine is entirely behind the front axles, I'm able to actually navigate these corners very sharply and very precisely, despite never having taken this car up to these roads. Now, I will say what makes this a little bit of a challenge, though, on these canyon roads is that it is a right-hand drive car. Now, this creates a problem here in the United States in that on some of these corners that are normally blind anyways, I am beyond blind because of sitting so far away from the center of the lane, meaning that I'm not able to see as much oncoming traffic. When it comes to handling, aside from the actual turn-in, how sharpness it is, but also I have to say that the car is handling absolutely flat. The sway bars combined with these coilovers are absolutely great. I will say though, it feels so different now compared to that Mazda where I have adaptive suspension and coilovers and sway bars and very sticky tires. The Cerbera is doing fairly well in comparison, but it does feel very, very different. It definitely has more of this raw, like almost driving on the edge, like it's gonna break loose at any moment, but not. So I will say that driving this car, even for someone like myself who's very experienced driving this road, I will say it is putting me on the edge, which is kind of fun. I haven't had this feeling in a long time, but also makes me very, very cautious to not push it too hard. So I don't want to have the rear end break loose and ultimately end off on the side of a cliff. So what I'm finding, an interesting comparison between the Mazda and the Cerbera is the steering. Now on some of these corners I've been going through, normally in the Mazda I'd have to do a little hand over hand to get the steering wheel in the right position to go around the corner successfully. Whereas in the Cerbera, I'm finding that at most, I'm usually going maybe 90 degrees left, 90 degrees right. So only like a quarter turn each direction, and that is enough to get me through these corners successfully. So the ratios are different, making that the tight steering wheel feel and the very sharp responsiveness and the flatness of the car. And this thing is handling these corners in the mountain great. I mean, it is no wonder it is a GT car. Now, one thing that I've noticed on the TVR when I go to drive it is that although the shift pattern is like a conventional shift pattern, so first is can be far to the left, with fifth being closest to me and up. Now, this wouldn't normally be a problem, but I'm finding that when I'm really aggressively driving, finding third is not always the easiest. It's almost like the position is a little farther over than you'd expect. So it's not like I'm skipping shifts or missing shifts. It's just that it's a little slower of a shift because I'm like, okay, it's not there, and oh, there it is, I can find it. So it's one of those things where I think if it was in a traditional sense, like a traditional left-hand drive car, I wouldn't have this issue, but since it's right-hand drive, third is a little farther over towards the driver than I'm used to. The second half of this drive through the mountains, the road is not as smooth as it was prior. There's a few more dips and little off-cambered corners, and so this is where I'm gonna definitely be interested to see how the TVR handles comparison to the Mazda or any other car I've taken up here for that matter. The TVR Cerbera has AP Racing disc brakes from the factory and provides more than enough stopping power without any brake fade. That's the tightest corner I've taken. It's just a little past 90 degrees. So yeah, handling this thing is sharp, it's precise, very little input to have a great response. It also means that it's probably very easy to overcorrect if you were to lose traction. So being very skilled at handling this car is a must. Now, one thing that is for sure about the Cerbera is that the climate control is not known to being that great. It's rather almost non-existent. And I have these fans blowing as hard as they can blow, and it's still not barely doing anything. I have the AC in the car. It was an option for my vehicle that I purchased. However, the system has a leak somewhere, and I wouldn't be driving with the AC anyways. Now, when it comes to adjusting the actual climate control in this car, there's two dials. You have one dial for cool air, so you press it to turn it on and adjust your fan speed there. Now, if you want the heater, you have to turn on the other dial, so you press the dial and adjust it as well. So it's kind of like mixing the hot and cold water on your shower more than it is like in a traditional car. Likewise, if you want to turn on the AC, you press another button, it clicks on the compressor, and then obviously you can blend it again. So it's a very unique solution to giving your climate control. Now, in England and other parts of the world where these are more common, obviously it doesn't get as warm as it does in Arizona, but you still want some airflow. Now, one thing that has happened, because it is a little cold out here, in a typical TVR fashion, there's certain things that kind of are quirky, to say the least, and my windshield wipers have decided to randomly turn on and spray water, and I can't get them to stop. So I had to pull over and pull a fuse to make him stop. This is just, once again, one of those things where, hey, it's TVR electronics. You gotta take the good with the bad, I guess. The TVR Cerbera is one of the most unique cars I've ever come across. Weighing nearly the same as a Mazda Miata and powered by TVR's proprietary V8, and even with its little quirks and flaws, it's easy to see how these have such a huge fan base in the UK. The Cerbera is a perfect example of what happens when car enthusiasts decide to build a car for other car enthusiasts. Make no mistake, the TVR Cerbera is classically beautiful, fast, and sounds amazing.